evening. And so that is an aspect of the work of our Confucius Institute that we do, is provide access to all of our participants. So my name is Catherine Johnson. My name sign is KJ, just KJ. That's how I'm known. And so I'm excited, really excited to start our spring speaker series. And we have a wonderful Minnesota guest, and he will be sharing his story. And we have Madam Yang from the Chinese Embassy, the PRC Embassy in Washington, D.C., from the Education Office. And so we invited John to come and share his story about the impact of participating in education abroad exchange programs, how that influenced his career, which was very extensive during your years, John. We last had you present at St. Cloud State for the 40-year anniversary, right? And that was amazing seeing your presentation. And so the focus and theme of our series throughout this spring is on scholarships for education abroad programs to China. We're very well aware of the fact that we are not traveling to China right now. However, the opportunity will come again. And I'm really excited to partner with the Education Office at the PRC Embassy on this series. We will have China Scholarship Council. We will have the China Association for International Education share their scholarships in different university programs across China who really do enjoy having American students come to their campus. Just like at St. Cloud State, where we have Chinese students who we value and really want to share their culture and home life and everything with all of our family at St. Cloud State, the universities in China, it's the same. They really look forward to hosting American students. And we hope to be able to start really initiating more of those opportunities, especially for our students from Minnesota in our Chinese immersion programs. So with that, John, I would like to introduce Madam Yang, who is going to give more details about you and your significant history with China. So Madam Yang.
Yes, thank you, Cassie. It's really a pleasure that my office can work with Cassie for this speaker series. I agree with Cassie, even though we are not easy to travel now, study in China is almost in person, not possible now. We still have a good wish that we're going to start again the people-to-people exchange, the students exchange soon. Hopefully the life will come back to normal soon. Then we can start all those kind of exchanges. So we're really delighted that we can work in this series, and I wish this information this speaker series can provide information with students, their parents, when they thought about study abroad, and when they thought of finding opportunities to study in another cultural environment. China is one of the places that may consider and look at. As Cassie just talked about, the Chinese universities is very open to welcome international students, and they provide a lot of programs and provide good services for international students. So we wish we can see more US students going to study in China in the future. So it's really, really a pleasure that I would like to introduce you today's guest speaker, John Holden. It's interesting. Among many people, when you say the name John Holden, especially Chinese people, they will maybe think about, oh, who is this gentleman? But if you talk about his name, his Chinese name, He Liqiang, everybody knows him. Everybody knows his name. So John really has an incredible career as a scholar, as a senior manager, as counselor. in academia, in business, and his China career spans more than 4 decades, as Cassie just mentioned. And with 28 years, I hope I'm right, John, 28 years of which he spent on the ground in Beijing, Hong Kong, and Taipei. Before joining McCarthy Associate, where he leads a Chinese team, he served as the president and CEO of the U.S.-China Strong Foundation, which is a organization to support U.S.-China student exchanges. And after a decade in Beijing as managing director and a senior counselor for Hill Norton Strategies, the founding chairman of Shikli Limited China, associate dean at Peking University's Yanqing Academy, and professor at Peking University's Guanghua School of Management, where is a very prestigious honor he received is a Chinese government's Friendship Award in 2017. This is an award granted to foreigners, foreign experts in China. It is the most prestigious honor that will be every year. The award ceremony will, during the Chinese National Day, the state leaders will present these awards to outstanding foreigners in China. And Golden also hold many positions in think tanks, in consulting agencies, and also in some organization like the president of the National Committee on United States and China Relations, which is a very, very important organization. And for 12 years prior that, he was employed by Cargill, where he played key roles in the establishment of a wide range of business in China. So he has extensive experiences in business, in government relations. So he is really has also a solid foundation in literary and Mandarin Chinese. He is very fluent in Chinese. If you don't look at his face, you couldn't tell who is speaking Chinese. He holds a BA in a degree from University of Minnesota and Stanford University for his MA and all his PhD work. So it's really a great honor to introduce John as a guest speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So John, I'm sure you've done many webinars, and we can ask you, do you prefer to have us stay on camera with you, or would you like to have the show here? I didn't know if you were using a PowerPoint, or would you like to just...
Well, thank you, Kathy, and Minister Counselor Yang, it's a pleasure to see you, and thank you for the very, very kind introduction. I thought I'd do something a little bit different tonight, and that is to just tell a story, and it's my story. And not to get me too confused with some photographs or PowerPoints. So I'll leave it up to you what you want to do. Okay. But I hope that my story you'll find interesting. It's getting longer and longer as you get older. And this year is a wonderful time for me to reflect upon my career, because it's fully 50 years since I began studying Chinese, half a century. And the world where I began learning Chinese is very, very different from the world we live in today. But I just want to lead off at the beginning by encouraging the students on the call. I want to say to you, take that extra bit of effort and energy to learn Chinese and to get good at it, to learn how to think in Chinese, and to experience the joys of the expanding world that will be open to you. So that's my main message. I've given it to you right at the very beginning. And I want you to be encouraged by that. You'll never know where it will lead you. Now, my story, Kathy, are we good?
Yeah, I think we're going to lower our cameras, Madam Young, if we can turn off our videos, because it does make for a more interactive, they can focus on you. Okay, so Madam Young, let's turn off our video and our microphone and let's hand it over to.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. So cast your minds back, for a lot of you, the young people, 50 years ago, 1971, that seems like ancient history. And I can certainly understand that. And the opportunities that I've had, I've been very, very fortunate that the Chinese language opened up huge opportunities for me in my career. But let me back up a step to before I began learning Chinese and to explain a little bit about why I chose to study this language. Well, when I was in high school, the world was in kind of turmoil. The late 60s, we had our own cultural upheavals in the United States. The civil rights movement was very much in full swing. The Vietnam War was going on, and young people were looking for answers. So I looked beyond the small world of Hopkins, Minnesota, where I grew up, overseas to learn about other religions. I studied yoga fairly seriously, Indian philosophy, and I was attracted to Chinese philosophy. I bought a copy of the I Ching, the great divination book of wisdom from ancient China. I studied that, read Chinese poetry. And then by the time I got to college, having spent my first year rather confused about what to do, I said, John, you need to learn a language. You need to open your horizons. And I chose Chinese because it was a living language. It is a living language with a deep, deep tradition, accessible through classical Chinese. Just to give you a little sense of the contrast between China then and now, it was not possible for Americans to travel to China. Kissinger was the first one to go that summer of 1971. But ordinary Americans could not go to the People's Republic of China. There was what we called the bamboo curtain. China was a populous country, but it wasn't as populous as it is now. There were 841 million people in China in 1971. India, by contrast, which is now catching up to China, will surpass it. India had 568 million people, and the US, 207 million, where we have 330 now. So I decided to study Chinese. I registered for the class, talked to my father, and he said, oh, that's a very wise decision. And I said, why, Dad? And he said, well, you're going to find it very, very useful in your life. And I looked at him and I said, gee, I don't think it's very useful. I can't go there. I didn't quite see what he saw. And of course, he was right. It turned out to be very useful. When I began learning Chinese, and I think this is important for all of those on the call to remember the importance of teachers. The teacher that I had from my first year Chinese section, Teresa Zheng, I remember her very well today. She was marvelous. Stephen Wong, who directed the program at the university, was a great teacher, and through them, I made progress and understood some of the bones and structure of the language in ways that I think gave me an advantage over other students of Chinese, the way they taught it. I had other marvelous teachers at Minnesota, C.J. Liu, Richard Mather, Ted Farmer, and others, and then at Stanford in my later academic career. Well, one of the things that I discovered about learning Chinese is that it's hard to do it with 1 hour of study a day, even with a second hour in language lab. So I enrolled in an intensive language program at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, the following summer, where we had 4 hours of class per day and 3 or 4 hours of language lab and many hours of homework. And I still said, my gosh, this is not fast enough. Because at that point I was really, I really was determined to learn the language well. And so I spoke to my teacher, Teresa Jung, and she said, I tell you what, why don't you go to Taipei and live with my parents? And you can study Chinese there. So that's what I did. I managed to work out an arrangement. I flew to Taipei, and I stayed in the home with her parents. And the memories from that first experience of mine in a Chinese environment are still very fresh in my mind today. And I can say to young people who are contemplating such an experience, study abroad, you will have indelible memories from that first trip that you take. I'll just give you a little sense of that. I still remember the desk where I practiced my characters. It had a glass top. And in the winter, because we didn't have heating, the tabletop was cold as ice. So I had to wear gloves when I practiced my Chinese characters. I remember the friends that I made, the young Chinese friends that I made at the time. And I'll tell you a little story. For those of you who know Chinese, you will remember when you are learning the language, there are times when you're frustrated because you can't express yourself or you don't understand something. And I had many of those moments. And I'll tell you a little story. In the neighborhood where we lived, there were vendors who came around with a cart offering food for sale. And each of them had their own special call that would alert people that they were there. And one morning, early in the morning, I heard one of them and I didn't understand it. And here's what he said. I'll remember it as if it was yesterday. He said, "Manto, manto." So I heard this. I didn't hear it very clearly. And I said, what is he saying? Is he saying ardo? Is he saying ears? Why would he say ears? So I went to ask the lady of the house and she laughed at me and she said, oh, no, they're selling manto. And so that was a little embarrassing, but I learned. And there was another fellow that came around and he was selling stinky tofu. And his cry was like this. Chodofu, chodofu. And for me, that is still in my mind, that is a morning in Taipei. Well, anyway, I had a marvelous year and went back to University of Minnesota, finished my degree, applied and got into Stanford for my PhD study. And another shout out to thank one of my teachers, because as I was walking on campus in June of 1974, just graduated, CJ Liu, Professor Liu said to me, John, are you free to go to China in a week? What? This was 1974. Well, to make a long story short, there was one opening on a tour, and I was able to sell my double bass to get the money to fund the trip for me, and traveled to Hong Kong and then up throughout China for 3 weeks. It was a marvelous experience. I learned a lot. And then it was a great moment to have done that at the beginning of my graduate studies. Never would have expected that opportunity. This was, by the way, a time when it was very difficult to understand China, because it was going through still the Cultural Revolution. It was called the Pilin Pikong period, the criticized Lin Biao and Confucius time. And one of the advantages that I have in talking about China is that I've witnessed all of the evolution and change and progress in China since those days. So I had a fabulous time at Stanford. I delved deeper into classical Chinese. I had my first experience teaching. I taught all of the Chinese language courses there, which I really enjoyed. And I went back to Taiwan on an organized program called the Inter-University Program for Chinese Language Study, which has now been moved, well, many years ago now, it's been moved to Tsinghua University, where it is today. But then as I was preparing to write a dissertation and preparing for an academic career, a friend of mine called me up, and she knew me very well. We had been students together. And she said, "John, are you sure you want to be an academic?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. It's not easy to find a job. The pay isn't very good. And it'll probably take me a few years to write a dissertation. So what do you have in mind?" She says, "Come here and work with us." So I went to Washington, D.C. I said, I'll try this. If I don't like business, I'll leave. Well, I did like it, and I never left, and I never went back to finish the PhD. It's a decision that I don't regret at all, because it was as you see from my subsequent experiences, that opened a door to a very rich career. So I worked for them, and then they sent me to China. But during that first year, in 1980, in Washington, I had the opportunity to travel with the National Geographic, which was hosting a group of Chinese desert scientists. They came from different parts of China, and they had come to learn about how to prevent desertification and prevent the deserts from creeping in on Chinese arable land. And I traveled with them for several weeks in Texas and Nevada and California, Arizona, and was an interpreter for them. Made good friendships there. And that then eventually led to the National Geographic offering me perhaps the best job I've ever had, which was to be one of the interpreters for a book project called Journey into China, a book that was researched in 1981 and published the following year. And my job was to interpret for teams going into Tibet and also along the Yellow River. So that was over the course of several months. And it was a time when China wanted to tell its story, and the Geographic was given a very, very open set of possibilities. We could go anywhere we wanted to. We could stop and talk to anyone we wanted to. And we did. And I'll tell you one little story from the trip along the Yellow River. So this is when we were in Henan province. We're not too far from the Yellow River. And we were driving along, and we saw a farmer in the field with tilling the land. He was an old man. We went up to him, and the American journalist said, we talked a little bit, and he said, what kind of chemical fertilizer are you using? So I interpreted to the man, and I said, 先生，你用什么化肥? He didn't understand. I repeated myself a couple of times, and then I was stumped. And then the man from Beijing, who had accompanied us, he said, let me try. So he said, 先生，用什么化肥? 用什么肥料? 还是听不懂. Right? And then he still didn't understand it. Then the local guy speaking in Henan dialect said the same thing, still didn't understand. We all scratched our heads, and then somebody finally said, oh, I know. What kind of manure are you using? 用什么饭? But that was everybody had a great laugh about that. But you know, it was one of those experiences that I had many over the course of my career when I was engaged in talking with just ordinary Chinese people, laughing because one thing is true of the Chinese people is they have a wonderful sense of humor. And, but I think back on that, that was one of the highlights of that trip. But it was really fortunate for me. In fact, I said later on that I would have gladly paid the National Geographic for the opportunity to do that. Well, I need to move along quickly because I have a long story to tell and I don't want to get too caught up. But I do want to say this about these experiences so far. None of it would have been possible if I hadn't worked hard to learn Chinese. So that was a key that opened many doors for me. Well, in 1982, I joined a trading company in Beijing, and I had a very fortunate encounter. This is an encounter with a brilliant and beautiful French lady named Isabel. This was in 1982. We met in Beijing. She had been studying Chinese and was working, as I was, in a trading company. We married in Paris in 1984, and we're about to become grandparents. We have 2 daughters. And so we've been together all this time and shared all the experiences since 1982. So I sometimes joke, people say, why did you study Chinese? Well, I said, it's to go to Beijing and meet a French girl. Some people think it's funny. My wife is getting tired of that joke, actually. Well, during my 12 years with Cargill, which is of course a Minnesota-based company, perhaps the biggest, either the biggest or second biggest privately held company in the world. It's a marvelous group of people, and I had a terrific time working with them. My job was to help build businesses in China. And so it started with a cottonseed processing plant in Shandong province. And then it went on to include a lot of other businesses, including hybrid seed, animal feed, and so on. A lot of it was in agriculture. And so I had many occasions to visit rural areas, which was always very enriching. Well, finally, we decided that it was time to leave Beijing. Wanted to go back, and Cargill said, come back to Minneapolis. But at that time, the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, Madam Yang mentioned, was looking for a new president. And they contacted me and offered me this marvelous opportunity to lead that historically important organization. And I, with some regrets, because I loved the company, I had to leave Cargill. And instead of moving to Minneapolis, we moved to New York. And so from 1998 to 2005, I led that organization. It was a time of a lot of turmoil in US-China relations. And it was a challenge constantly to find ways of ensuring that the conversation between America and China was productive and honest. And that was our role. We addressed a lot of issues, including educational exchanges. But during my time there, we witnessed the entry of China into the World Trade Organization, the tragic bombing of the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia, the crash of the 2 US and Chinese planes off of the island of Hainan in 2001. And I'll just mention these things in passing because we've had many crises in this relationship, and we've managed to right the boat and prevent it from capsizing. And we're at another difficult moment in this relationship. And I'm optimistic that we'll be able to move forward productively together going forward. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. but I just want to mention two programs that I developed while at the National Committee. And one of them was based on the dream that at some point in a future crisis, American and Chinese leaders would know each other from the days they spent as young people getting to know each other and developing friendships. And so I created a thing called the Young Leaders Forum for people under the age of 40, leaders in their fields in America and in China. And we created opportunity for an intensive retreat every year, either one year in China, 1 year in the US, for these people to get to know each other. And I encourage you to look at the website of the National Committee to see some of the outstanding people. We've had astronauts, members of Congress, leading Chinese business people, and journalists and others, government officials, participate and develop very, very close friendships through that program. So far, we don't have anybody in the program that is at the level of Secretary of State or Chinese Foreign Minister, but we do have a power couple, Gabrielle Giffords, who was tragically shot. She's a former congressman from Arizona, and her husband, Mark Kelly, who was recently elected to the Senate, to the United States Senate. So he's the most senior of the leaders that we picked at those times. In fact, the program was when the two of them met each other in China. So the other program I created was the Public Intellectuals Program. This is a program that helps academic scholars of China to engage with public discourse about China, to help educate Americans about it. So during my years at the National Committee, we had a very prestigious board of directors. We took on a program that Henry Kissinger and Cyrus Vance had begun many years earlier and merged it with us. I got to know Henry Kissinger very, very well as a result of that, traveled with him to China and introduced him, I have to brag about this, to the first sort of ordinary Chinese people that he'd ever met. And of course, during these trips, often had occasion to meet Chinese leaders. And that was very instructive and helped me understand a lot about China that way. Let me move now back to Beijing. So after 8 years in New York, I had an opportunity to go back into business in China, moved back, and then was there for 7 years. I won't go into that period. And then I took a pause in 2013 and spent some time in France with the family, and had the opportunity to go to Peking University as an associate dean of the Yenching Academy. And it was spent 3.5 years there, helped to build that program from the ground up. And my job consisted of two things. One, it was recruiting top students from around the world to come on a scholarship program. And it was also to serve as a counselor to them and as a career guide to them when they left. So I traveled around the world and to universities and recruited many hundreds of spectacularly gifted students, both Chinese and foreign. It was a tremendous privilege to spend time at that beautiful university. We lived on campus. And I think back, I still stay in touch with the former president of the university and many other colleagues. And I learned that just a few days ago, people spotted the first spring flowers on the campus of Beida, Peking University, because it's been quite warm there. 2017 was when I was honored with the Friendship Award. And that was really, I think, an honor for not so much me, but for the program at Yanqing and for Beida. But it was a very memorable ceremony and an opportunity to meet Premier Li Keqiang. Very, very interesting event. And then I had the opportunity to lead the U.S.-China Strong Foundation, which had been set up, as Madam Yang mentioned, to promote educational exchanges, and moved from there 2 years ago to McLarty. We are now in a period, and let me just talk a little bit about U.S.-China relations, and then leave some time for discussion or questions that you might have. As I mentioned earlier, this relationship has become exponentially more complicated and rich and difficult than it was when I first began in those days. When Henry Kissinger went to Beijing in 1971, the concern was threats to both countries from the Soviet Union. That was the central guiding principle of the relationship. And this changed, and things have changed enormously since then. And I think that is it's important to recall that it shouldn't be surprising that given the massive changes that have taken place in China since those days, and less important, but still important, changes in the United States, that we shouldn't have to constantly be adjusting our relationship. But I don't want to go into a full diagnosis of the problems that we're now facing. There are many reasons for them. But I will say that those of you contemplating the prospect of learning Chinese and becoming fluent in not just the language, but the culture, understanding China, I can assure you that there will be many opportunities for you going forward. There will always be a premium on knowledge and understanding of other cultures. And that goes in both directions. So it's not easy to understand China. This is a big country that's rapidly evolving. It has a deep and rich culture and history and regional differences and so on and so forth. You can't imagine the number of times that I've been surprised by how little I know about China. And that's when even people think of me as a 中国通, as a China hand, but I always say 中国政府在通不了. I can't understand it all. It's just way too complicated. So, and I think the same thing is true in many ways for our Chinese friends to understand the United States. We're also, we're a young country, but we're based on ancient civilizations also, with ancient religions and philosophies. And we are a very dynamic place that is in many ways quite different from China. So it's not easy to understand us. And I would even venture to say that for Americans to understand our own country is tough. I certainly, there have been a lot of things that have surprised me about what's happened in our country and have surprised our own leaders as well. And I'd venture to say that for the Chinese people, if they really look at their own country, they would say, gosh, there's a lot of things that that I don't quite understand about it, because it is big and complicated. So that shouldn't be discouraging to us. It should offer the challenge, though, that there's always more to learn. And if you have a thirst for knowledge, learning about China will keep you busy and stimulated for a long time. So I think the lesson, therefore, is that for the two countries, and given our importance and our power to do good and to do and to do bad things as well. There's a huge premium now on knowledge and wisdom and on patience. We must recognize that the problem that we see today may in some ways become less of a problem tomorrow just because of the way that our countries are evolving. There will always be areas where we're going to compete. There will be areas where we can cooperate. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that the planet that we live on, Earth, is a small planet, and it's strained today. And we also have to understand that modern weapons, weapons of mass destruction, mean that if we make mistakes, we could destroy this planet. We could destroy each other. So above all, the thing that our leaders and our peoples need to understand is that we absolutely must learn to live with each other peaceably. We don't have to agree on everything. That's certainly impossible. But we have to at least try to understand each other. A phrase that I used to hear often from Chinese friends is 求同存异, which means seek common ground and reserve differences, or put them to the side. And I think that's a wise expression. So just to conclude, this is where the subject of educational exchanges comes into the picture. So we need to encourage more Americans to study in China. In my day, I could only choose between Taiwan and Hong Kong. Now you can go everywhere in the mainland. There's so many more opportunities today. And we need to continue, and this is very important, we need to continue as Americans to welcome Chinese students in the United States. Yes, there may be some problems in educational exchanges occasionally, but those problems are dwarfed by the advantages. We have an expression, a chengyu in English, which is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So let's keep educational exchanges going. Let's try to solve the problems, but let's recognize the advantages. And I would say that on American campuses, there are opportunities to make our Chinese 同学们 feel more welcome. And I know that a friend of mine is on this call. I'll just give a shout out to Frank Dolce, who's worked in this field and has many great ideas on how to create opportunities for Chinese American students to get to know one another and become friends on campus. So hi, Frank. Keep up the good work. I'd also like to thank Kathy, Madam Young, and all those who are devoting their time towards tirelessly to make educational opportunities available to Americans and Chinese to learn more about one another. Truly, nothing less than global peace and prosperity is at stake. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, John. I just love hearing you share your story. I love the format that you used this evening. The informality of it is powerful because your story is a testimony to the power of people-to-people exchange. And we will get there when people can travel again. And, you know, you're reflecting on 50 years back to where you are today. And I think about our young people who have the next 50 years ahead of them. And how can they be part of the process of rebuilding trust and rebuilding friendship between our two countries? And you know, one of the last times that you and I met at your brother's house, right, in St. Cloud, and you were talking about potentially writing your book. And tonight, I think you really provided an opportunity to say, yes, please share your story and get it out there so that more people can learn from your journey. And My journey has been 21 years, so not even half of what you've been doing. And the thing that I readily admit is my weakness is I never learned Chinese. I have enough to fool people into thinking that I know Chinese, which mostly gets me into trouble. And I love learning Chinese Sign Language when I first started on my journey working with deaf education in China. And that, I think that's probably been one of the main reasons I've been such a strong advocate for our Minnesota immersion programs, one of which is in Hopkins, your alma mater. And really, that it hasn't prevented me from not making friends in China. I love my friends in China and I miss them very much. But not having the access to the language has been a challenge, obviously. And so our young people have that advantage. And I am so proud of the programs in Minnesota. And I know that other programs across the United States are obviously in the same boat. And you allude to the fact that the last 4 years have been extremely difficult. And I believe in the power of storytelling to shift that narrative. And I think more people need to start sharing their stories like you did, and really bring it back to the point that it's people. We're talking about people. It's not just governments tweeting about each other and who's doing what. Okay, so only one government is tweeting, but we to bring it back down to the people and the power of people to exchange that we have, and sharing of knowledge and expertise, and all of that was a part of your story. And so Madam Yang, if you're here, can you come? I think that you're still on. If you can come back on, there you are.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
could you
Yeah.
share some reflections on this too?
Yeah, thank you, John, so much. I love you to hear you sharing your stories with our audience. It's so inspiring. So actually, we are working on a project that, like Casey said, want people to tell your stories. So we're working on a project to work with the Xinhua News Agency to interview a number of American people who have been or either studied or worked or have involved in the relationship with China, to tell their stories and to share their stories with young people. We have invited John, and I hope, John, you can accept the invitation to join this.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
Please. So interesting, your story, because we're going to do a series of interviews, then come up with a documentary, and also come up with a book about your stories. So this is very interesting. And I also like to invite Casey, if you could be happy to join this. It'll be a wonderful project that we just started. So so John, please, thank you so much. And I agree with you totally about to understand each other is so important, and educate our young generation to understand each other, to can work together. This world need US and China to work together.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Madam Yang, for your feedback, because this is really this series, speaker series, is really a partnership between the Ministry of Education and the Embassy and St. Cloud State University. So thank you for sharing that feedback with John. John, I do have a question. This is from a colleague of mine, Paul Bell. So if I can ask that question, please, and maybe you can see it, but I'll read it for our participants. The US-China relations has been described as a dialectical relationship between friendship and animosity, attraction and repulsion. Within each period, like you had alluded to, there are the seeds of its opposite. As we have now moved into a new period of animosity, what do you see as the seeds that will lead to a change, to a new era of friendship and attraction? How can we water those seeds to make them grow? Thank you, Paul Bell. I appreciate that.
Well, it's an interesting question, and I would sort of analyze it slightly differently, and I would say that yes, at the highest level of abstraction, you might say that there are periods of friendship and then periods of animosity over a longer period of time. But I think that, as I indicated earlier, I think the relationship has become so complex that right now there are multiple areas of animosity, multiple areas of friendship and attraction that coexist and evolve in on their own trajectories in some cases. For example, um, I think China is well served by the students and people it sends to the United States that we interact with. American people don't have a bad. American people like Chinese people. That has not changed. So there's the human to human friendship potential is still very much there, and I think there are natural reasons for that. On the government side of things, it's very difficult when you have a what was once clearly the dominant power in the world, United States, trying to manage the relationship with the rising power, which is China. There are some things that are naturally will create friction and the potential for problems and misunderstanding. If I all of a sudden, if I buy a hunting rifle, I don't want to use that example. Let's not talk about guns.
Okay,
Never mind. I'll skip that one. But I think there are, just to give an example of what you asked, what can we do to sort of create more friendship communication? Just one example. I was at a conference 2 years ago in Beijing, and one of the subjects was data privacy. Data privacy is a really important thing that Americans are concerned about, Europeans are concerned about, and it probably is a surprise to many Americans, but the Chinese people are concerned about it as well. And this man who expressed his concern about the management of data privacy was a former vice minister in China. And for him to have said that was a little, I found very interesting. And I think if Americans and Chinese could talk more about the ethical and moral questions that technology brings to us, we'll find that there's a lot of things that we agree upon. It doesn't mean that we'll always agree, and it doesn't mean that we'll agree with our governments about these things. But I'd like to see the possibility for more of these kinds of unscripted and unmanaged conversations, if you will, so we can see each other as, because my Chinese friends, they think about all the same things that I do. There's a lot in fundamental ways. So I haven't answered your question, but I do think encouraging more of these kinds of opportunities. I'd also say, Paul, I'd like to add one other recommendation that I've been making now for 23 years with almost no success. And I'm just going to make it again publicly. And that is, I think that there ought to be more opportunities for ordinary Chinese people or even leaders to get out in front of the American people on televised media. We have no restrictions. If you want to go on Meet the Press or the Oprah Winfrey show, this is when I used to be suggesting this. I said, go on Oprah Winfrey and talk about the hopes and fears and loves and desires of the average Chinese people, what you're proud of, to make China be more real and personal. And I've heard Chinese leaders talk about their lives. Wen Jiabao, for example, at the State Department, he and Colin Powell each talked about growing up poor in their lives and what that meant. So anyway, I think there are opportunities that we're missing. And by the same token, I think we should facilitate more opportunities to use the media where you can generate goodwill towards one another. That's what we should be doing, because there's too much ill will arising in both countries right now. Sorry to go on for so long.
No. It's fantastic. And thank you, Paul, for asking that question. And I agree, maximizing media. So I'll share a brief story. You know, Senator Tom Harkin, right?
Sure.
And so we worked with the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to share about the UN International Day for People with Disabilities, because it was the 30-year anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the embassy helped create a short 2-minute snippet of Senator Tom Harkin sharing briefly about the ADA. In the first week, 1.2 million people in China watched Senator Tom Harkin.
Yes.
And so that was on WeChat and Weibo on the Chinese social media. But it is, how do we share those stories, I guess, is a question. And also, I'm thankful, as you shared with Frank Dolce, of leading our UNESCO story circles. We have a workshop this Saturday. So from 12 to 1:30 p.m., where we will be learning about UNESCO story circles, because in this time when we are not able to travel, how do we keep that communication happening? And, you know, it's, as we get to the last minute, it's funny, John, because at the end of our initial planning period last night, where we had moderators in a discussion about leading these story circles and how we're going to bring that to high school students in Minnesota, learning Chinese and meeting young people from China. I'm really excited to scale that up and bring that to our communities. But I said, how about we invite President Biden and President Xi to our story circles? Join in, have dialogue. And okay, so I know it's not going to happen, but I do feel very thankful that Madam Young is willing to be a part of these. And like you said, be open and honest with our dialogue. And so thank you, Madam Young. If you can come back on, and John and I, these two Minnesotans, can give you a nice warm thank you. If you're still there, I think she's still here. We'll see if she comes on. If not, she knows. There she is. So we want both John and I, right, John? Want to have the opportunity to say thank you so much for being a part of this speaker series and for being here to introduce John. And obviously, as a Minnesotan who is involved with China, and I love China, John, we're so proud of you. And that, I don't know, I think you might be the only Minnesotan to have received the Friendship Award from China, right?
I don't know.
I think so. Let's do some history. All right, everyone, we'll start next week with an announcement on that. But I think you're the only one from Minnesota who has received that award, and we're very proud of you. So thank you, everyone. Please join us next week. It is China Scholarship Council. We'll be sharing about their scholarships, and like John has shared, you never know where your opportunity will lead you and how it will advance not just your professional career, but your personal being as an advocate for building these partnerships. So thank you, everyone. Time to say goodbye. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you to our